question.
Okay, so let's review the places from your memory, or from maybe not your memory, but stories you've been told about your parents and where they were from and the different places that they lived.
Okay, as far as I know, my mom, I'm not sure if she was born there or they moved there, Calgary. And
It was Calgary in Canada, western part of Canada, right?
Yes,
right.
in Canada. And then my dad, he was born over in Ukraine. And then they were indentured servants somewhere in near Saskatoon. Saskatchewan, somewhere
But they were
along
farmers,
there.
so that
but
had
they
to
were
be somewhere
farmers,
near.
and it had to be, because that's the flat or the bread box of
Right.
Canada.
Right.
So somewhere along there, I don't know much about it. Just gave you that one little bit of story about them working. When he became my grandpa Thiessen became a landowner after he paid for his passage over. And he was very frugal, and he became wealthy in a sense, and so forth. And then when my dad and mom, I don't know exactly where they met, but I don't know that they met after my dad was a trucker, because if he was over in Saskatoon and she was over on the West Coast, somewhere along there. I don't even know where she was a housemaid or cook or whatever she did for that woman. But in those days, it's sort of along the lines of what you hear the stories like Downton Abbey, and how the lady of the manor was cared for her servants, almost if they're a good family, as a family, an extended family, or some such, although they were paid for their work. So I'm sure it's pretty interesting. I'm not sure if my mom lived at the house where she was working, or her and her sister and a few other ladies had an apartment, or what. But somewhere along the line, that's where my mom and dad met. And then after they met, I'm not even sure exactly where they settled. I know for a while that my mom and dad had a store of some sort. And I'm not even sure if it was even when they were married, but I was told my dad had a store. I don't know if he ran it or what.
Hardware store, right? Yeah. I think it was. She's told me that it was a hardware store.
Okay, hardware store. And from there, I don't know if it was after or before or how it worked. But eventually, they ended up in Guelph, where my brother Wes was born. And then from Guelph, they moved to Niagara Falls, New York. My dad worked on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And he would also, I don't know if it was at that time that he worked for Eagle's construction company. He was a mechanic, but he was also the manager of a Yorkshire Apartments, where we had an apartment at that given time. That was the year, so it must have been maybe about 1960 or so, that my grandpa Jansen died, and my mom went by herself back to where her parents to be present for the funeral of her dad. And Dad took care of us three kids, and I believe my mom was pregnant at the time with the baby that she lost. And that story, again, I don't know if anybody else, I vaguely remember this, even though like I said, at that time I was looking in on life rather than participating a lot. I remember the one time, because I guess it was unusual for my father to be there taking care of us and no mom, temporarily. And Dad fed us and everything, and we were sitting down to watch the TV. My brother was sitting on the floor, I was sitting on the sofa, and he was right below me. And it was at one of those times, because I had that tumor and never know when I upchucked all over him.
I hadn't heard this story. I hadn't heard this one.
It was hilarious in one sense, but I didn't feel good at the time, so I didn't think it was hilarious at the time. And I'm sure Wesley didn't think so.
At the
But
time.
he doesn't remember any of that, but then that's because he's got Alzheimer's right now. But it was sort of funny. My dad had to clean up. He had to clean up all that, and his man, he had a weak stomach, so I don't know how we managed to do it all with that. But yeah, showers or baths for both of us because we were a mess. But it was just something that sort of stuck in my mind
right.
of what happened. I know Wesley didn't appreciate being thrown up. Even though I must have been about, at that time, about 6 years old, so he must have been about 4 or so. I don't know. It just sort of stuck in my mind. And even at the Guelph apartments, or the house that my parents lived in Guelph, where Wes was born, I remember vaguely one time, certain things stick out, but not a whole bunch. I woke up from a nap to discover nobody in the house, and that really scared me. I think I finally found them all outside. I don't know why I was napping. Who knows? But that's where it all... But it was a relief to know that there was other people around. It was strange to wake up in this big house, which I thought is big,
Yeah.
to have it totally empty but me. And then from Guelph, like I said, we moved to Niagara Falls, New York. My dad was a Yorkshire apartment manager, and I believe it's because Elia Construction owned it, and that's who my dad worked with. So he sort of had 2 hats. He was a manager, along with Mom, so that we could stay there or live there. And also, he worked on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And he had an interesting time there. And then from there, we went to Birch Avenue. And that was...
No, you just said that. You're on
No, I
Birch
said
Avenue.
no. Yorkshire Apartments was in Niagara Falls,
okay.
New York. Birch Avenue was on the outskirts,
Okay, right.
but still considered Niagara Falls at that time.
all right.
Outskirts of where we did live, where the Yorkshire Apartments were. And that house is where when you went in, I described it before, you would go in to the kitchen. We didn't use the front door. The kitchen, and then off to the left was the door leading into the bathroom. And to get upstairs, you had to go through the bathroom to go upstairs to our bedroom. My mom and dad had a bedroom downstairs, but the other ones were upstairs. And so if anybody was using the bathroom, I'm sure it was interesting. I don't remember too much about it, and I don't. There was 2 bedrooms upstairs. We had the back one, and then my brother and uncle were in the... That's when my uncle came to live with us. That's when we left Yorkshire Apartments. And from there, I think I already talked about that brother that died, or brother, sister, the baby. Right. So that was where it is. And then from there, we moved to Lewiston, the old military police building, which was next to a cemetery. And that was there was an old military road, and then they built a new military road, but they just called it Military Road up above. But we were on the old one, which was right beside the cemetery. And there was a field that belonged to the cemetery, but they weren't using it at that time. But this old state troopers building, my dad converted into where we were going to live. He needed a large place because he had a lot of kids. The twins were not born, and I don't believe Debbie was born yet. And Arnold, at the time, Arnold, somewhere around there, it's from 1960 from there on. But we came in, my dad had the main office of this police station changed into a kitchen. It was a square kitchen because it was a square office. You would go through the door, we had a wide hallway, and then you turn to your left, and immediately to the left, and that was the kitchen. And that's where main thing. We even entertained at the kitchen because that's just the way our family did things. It was more comfortable sitting at the kitchen table than it was anywhere else, I guess. But that was the first place. And then he built sort of along the side of the hall a place where we could hang our coats and hats and put our boots and stuff like that. But you go down the hall, and the first door to your right was another office, but they converted it into a living room, which later became the boys' bedroom, because when there was a lot of kids, that was just the way it goes. We continued down the hallway, then to the left, after the kitchen, you go down a little bit, there were steps leading up to the upstairs, and there was steps, a landing, and then you did a sort of a U-y thing, and then we went up to another, and then there was a big, huge, I would like to say a hall, but it really wasn't a hall. It was sort of more like a foyer, because it was a room in itself, basically. I would assume that's probably where they might have had someone, the receptionist or something. But then there was 2 large rooms. So when you went up the stairs, you turned to your left and then another left real quick. And there was a door, a large room. And I would assume that was the office where they had a lot of, I don't know how many desks or how many police. But that became our bonus room, I guess you could sort of say, because my dad put a pool table in it. We had a sofa, several sofas actually, a closet where there was, where we put the TV and stuff like that. Nothing like what kind of TV we have nowadays.
Oh yeah, black and white. You
Black and white.
Changed the channel. Yeah.
Actually changed the channel, and it was the big tube kind of thing. But that was our. My dad did put a window unit, air conditioning unit in there, but we didn't get to use it very often. But that's where he would congregate with his workers, because by that time, my dad finally left Elia's construction as a mechanic, because they just worked him all the time. There was very little time what happened?
He just sat down. The cat just sat down.
Little time to be with the family. When he got home, he'd fall asleep immediately. So we didn't, but when he became self-employed, he worked really hard too. So he came, and outside, so he came home, and there would be times that he would have a good sleep a lot. But that was that room. But when you went back out, we had a desk in the main one where we sort of like kind of you could use it even as a library, but we didn't have that many books, but there was a lot of things that my dad liked to keep, and that's where it was. But then when you came out of it, if you continued going towards it, there was another dorm room, large room, and it was to your left too. After you went there, you passed the desk, you go there. It was mine and Wesley and eventually Arnold's bedroom to start off with, I think. Some of that stuff was kind of vague, again, because I was looking in on life and I was just struggling to overcome the surgery and all that I had. So we stayed there in that one, and then eventually we got switched around so that became my parents' bedroom, so that when they had, it was after Heather and David and Heather were born, and my parents had the bigger room, so that was sort of half. They had cribs for quite a while where the twins stayed, and my mom. And then we took over the bedroom that they had, which was in the same upstairs area that I shared with Debbie and eventually Heather. And then across the way was my uncle's bedroom. But then we went back downstairs and we went through the hall. You turn to the left and then you have to turn sharply to the right. At that time, my dad was digging it was just where they had the septic tank with the part of the floor coming up. And it just had a septic pump.
Okay, to be precise. It wasn't septic. It was just a water.
well,
for rainwater.
Rainwater. Okay,
The
that's
septic went somewhere else.
right.
It did not.
I
go-
was
okay, right. That's fair.
But my dad dug it out so that there was a basement, and then he put a ladder down there. And Mom, and he never finished it, but Mom had to go down, and of course, washer and no dryer, but a washer, and it was the old one, the ringer kind that my mom had to do. And going down that ladder, she was pregnant with the twins at the time. That is a feat. That hole scared me. I didn't like when it was open to go across, but when we went across it, there was a bathroom there, and that was the only one. There was no bathtub. We had a tin bath that we used to take a bath in, but that was all the bathroom that we had, although there is one upstairs, but it didn't work too well. And it was right above the one on the floor, or on the ground floor. And then in the back, that was the room my older sister got. And then there was another door that my dad and uncle made into a dark room, because they were into photography a lot. But before going to shift around, right next to the stairwell, there was a door leading into a bay garage, and that would be where they kept all the police cars at that time. So it was a large garage. But my parents never used it as a garage. It was storage. My dad liked to collect things, and he never got rid of things. So that's where that was, because I, even at this time, don't even begin to know what was in those boxes. But he had boxes and boxes of stuff. And I made myself a nice hidey hole there. So when I didn't want to have to take care of the kids and stuff like that, I snuck up there and just read. That was my quiet area to go to, if I could handle the heat, tolerate the heat, because that was there. And of course, with my dad being a self-employed person, he had different equipment that he used, like a grater. He had 2 of them. He had backhoe. He had all kinds of things. And he also, in times when the cemetery's backhoe didn't work, they hired my dad to dig the grave or such like. And the cemetery was our playground, which was fun because we rode all over the place. We didn't have to really worry about traffic being heavy or fast traffic because it was a cemetery. It was neat to see grave sites listing 1800s and so forth and so on. It was a neat place to explore and stuff. One time I remember, there were several incidents that we remember. In the wintertime, on the other side of the cemetery was a reservoir. And how it happened, it was steep enough, but also there was parts that weren't steep. It became a place where people went tobogganing in the wintertime. The times that I've gone during the daytime, it got pretty crowded, and I got hurt there a lot. So there was times, since it was in walking distance of our house, maybe a half mile, and my mom and dad would join us too. We had a toboggan, and we would go up to the reservoir, and we would go tobogganing at night. It was wonderful. We had a lot of fun doing it. So yes, that was a nice side issue time and everything. And eventually, as my dad did different things as self-employed, he made pools. That's what the line of work he went into. But he also did different things. He demolished houses and stuff like that, or buildings. He was hired, and I don't know exactly how he managed to get those jobs, but he was out there. He was very, what would you call it?
Jack of all trades, and
Jack of all trades.
very good mechanic, but he did a lot of different things.
Yeah, he did a lot of different things, but his charisma, I don't know, that he was able to get.
He was popular and ability.
He was popular. He was able to, and he had his finger in the pie kind of thing. That he got the jobs, and of course, a lot of the money that he would get would go back into repairing his equipment. He also had workers, at least one or two workers besides my uncle and my older brother, or my younger brother West, the one that's just below me. He started off with that after he recovered from the ulcers that he had.
Well, next step would be where'd you move next?
Yeah, but I'm gonna just
Talk about Wesley?
no Lewiston and what they did.
Okay, all right.
So he was self-employed. He did, as Robin said, a jack of all trades, and he did that. And then eventually, I guess he got hired by Tallman Pools, who was up there too, but he wanted to go further, and that's when they moved down to Tampa. And at that time, I was 19, and I elected to go. Claire stayed, who was my older sister, because she was running the dry cleaners that my mom and dad owned. And my mom worked at there as the seamstress as well as the person who cleaned it. I think my dad helped in some of that area too, but mostly it was Mom and Claire. And Claire was training, or I'm not sure she went to nursing school up there or if it was down in Tampa. I'm thinking it was Tampa. But that's when he was hired by Tallman Pools. I don't know how soon after or whatever, we went to Tampa in 1974, January of 1974 to Tampa. And that's where we lived, and that's where I met Robin when I got hired by Grant's department store.
We'll get into that in another video, but how old were I'm just curious, how old were the twins when you moved to Tampa? They had to be very young.
Yeah.
They
were going to be turning 4 that May.
Okay, just curious. Yeah, okay. Now, physically, your dad was fairly short and sort of lean. He was not...
No meat on him.
Right. He was that was what I remember about him, but I mean, right, I mean, he